Hi, and welcome to the Rare Business Podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm a consultant, advisor, researcher, and writer on all things related to customer service and customer experience. Through this podcast, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, and leading thinkers about what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees in this fast-moving modern age that we live in. If this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then welcome, and please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsco.com, as I've now completed over 250 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then thank you for returning, and I'll aim to do a good enough job to keep you coming back week after week. Anyway, that's enough from me right now. Let's get into the interview. So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I have Bernadette Jiwa, who is an old friend of the podcast. And Bernadette is the founder of The Story of Telling and an author of 7 books on marketing and brand storytelling. Hi, Bernadette, and welcome back.
Thanks, Adrian. It's always great to chat to you.
Now, so Bernadette, I know that I get new listeners, and but also kind of older listeners that sort of people that subscribe and keep coming back, but I also have new people that keep showing up at the podcast. So for their benefit, can you give us a bit of a thumbnail sketch on you and the work that you do?
So I am based in Australia. I work with global brands. I'm an expert on the role of story in marketing and innovation, and one of Australia's top business thinkers.
Perfect. Now, so the reason because we spoke actually last year, and it was about another book of yours, but then I noticed that you had another book out, and this new book called Story Driven. You don't need to compete when you know who you are, and that's the main reason that I scheduled another time to have a chat to you about that. So can you tell us a little bit about this new book, which has come pretty quickly hot on the heels of the other one, I guess, but tell us about Story Driven.
So the reason it feels like it's come hot on the heels of the other one is the other one was traditionally published. So anybody who knows the process of going with the traditional publishers, it takes a lot longer to get the book into the hands of readers.
Yeah.
And this one is published by Perceptive Press, which is my own publishing company. And that is intentional to get the book into the hands of readers sooner rather than later. So it's been the idea for Story Driven, as with all my books, comes from, it's informed by the work that I do with clients, whether that is entrepreneurs or whether that's global brands. And when I feel like there's something that I can really share with people to help them to be true to themselves and build the kinds of businesses that they want in the right company, then I have to share it. So that's where this one came from.
Perfect. Now, you mentioned Perceptive Press, and I thought, because I'm a bit of a book nerd, and I look at some of these things and go, Perceptive Press, who are they? And so I looked it up, and I was like, this is interesting. So I just thought there's a bit of a sidebar in a way, but tell us about Perceptive Press, because I think there's an interesting backstory to that.
Well, I have self-published, and I've got 7 books, and I've self-published 6 of them. And Perceptive Press is the publishing company that I self-publish under, and it's just it's an intentional choice, really. It enables me to have a lot of creative control. And all sorts of other things that we could do a whole podcast on.
So I was looking at the book and sort of raced through it. But one of the things I thought I would do, if that's okay with you, is I thought I'd ask a few questions that I pulled together that I thought would give listeners and readers a flavour of the book. And actually, a lot of that's about asking you to tell some of the stories that are in the book, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So I was going through it, and one of the first ones that literally leapt off the page for me was the story about Moyes' chair and his story and his thing. And I wanted to ask you to tell me that story sort of in live, as it were, and what we think we can learn from it. Because I think it's just a great story, because I love it.
So the reason I put Moyes' story in there is to do with partly the model, which is a story-driven model, which we might get a chance to touch on later. Essentially, the thing about every great business or every great career is that you've got a backstory, you've got a journey to now, which is, there's something in that, in your history, in your heritage, in your backstory that compels you to be as you are in the work that you do. So Moyes is my husband. He is a professor at a medical school. He also was a GP in the UK, and he still practices 1 day a week. The chair story is this. In his backstory, he was a migrant to Ireland, where I grew up. And on the part of the journey to Ireland was he came to the UK, and he is of Indian descent.
Right.
And when he was at Birmingham Airport, he and his mother and his brother they suffered a real indignity that sort of stayed with them. He was 10 years of age, and they had to strip naked, and they had some kind of medical examination, making sure they weren't infectious, and it just wasn't handled very nicely.
Sure.
And that stayed with him. So he sort of brings that to his practice in medicine. So we fast forward now to his practice, and he decided that he wanted to mix things up a bit in his consultation room. And what he does is the traditional doctor's office where you go in, the doctor's sitting in the nice comfy chair behind the desk. Sometimes they sit to the side now. It's a bit more, politically correct. So a lot of the time they might be looking at a computer these days.
Sure.
What he does is, computer's nowhere near. He puts the big chair, when the patient comes in, he stands up, he greets them, he shakes. In fact, he goes out and he gets them from the waiting room, shakes the hand, guides them down to the room where they're going to consult, and he puts them in the big chair, and he sits in the standard issue, what the patient would normally sit in.
Right.
And it just changes the whole consultation. It changes the power dynamic. It makes the patient feel more empowered. And he's had great success with it. In fact, patients sometimes say to him, why am I sitting in the big chair? And he says, well, you're the one who's sick, aren't you? Or you're the one who's, come.
Indeed.
So, it's just he's writing up, several things about it at the moment. But it's such a simple thing, and yet it teaches us so much about empathy and the small things that we can do in our day-to-day that can change everything in an experience.
Absolutely. I think, and there's a huge amount of humility and respect, and that's a whole power balance, and sort of helping people understand who's the most important person, because I think there's a danger that when people get, I feel like, more senior, more experienced, more qualified, that we ascribe kind of more importance to them, and then there's almost this kind of this culture of deference and everything else, and that doesn't really help the communication process.
When we go back to it, I was thinking, we often talk a lot about the role of the doctor. I know this might be a bit off topic for you or for your listeners, but when we often talk here about the role of the doctor, and I think about my parents and how the doctor back in the day was God to them. You didn't question.
Sure.
If the doctor said it, you did it. Now, of course, people, have got more information at their fingertips. They Google their symptoms. They're much more informed. And yet, you still go to the doctor because you need the human connection. So this is, part of the reason I put Moyes' story in there is because this is what business should be about too, right? It's not just about, and that's what I've found through my work. Our job is to do work we're proud of. That's what we all want to do, regardless of what our work is.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So let's move on to another sort of story which I'd never heard before either, and it was a story of Tor Sornes. Hopefully, I
Yeah.
pronounce his name right.
Beautifully pronounced, better than me. I always cringe when I have to pronounce his name to the wonderful colleagues that I've worked with. That this company called Assa Abloy.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a company that I have worked with over a number of years, and this was the first project we worked on. Assa Abloy is a global leader in access solutions, so it's quite a big company. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, you've probably used a lot of their products if you've walked through a hotel room, or you've stayed in a hotel, or you walked through an automatic door, or authenticated your online identity. You've probably experienced their products.
Sure.
Anyway, part of their backstory of their hospitality brand was that this lone Norwegian lockmaker called Tor Sørnes, he was a lock engineer, and he absolutely loved the singer Connie Francis. And he heard one day in the news that she'd been attacked in her hotel bedroom while she was on tour. And he literally sat down and decided that this couldn't happen again, that this was not on, that people needed to feel safe when they traveled.
Yeah.
And he invented the hotel key card. So the key cards that we all use and take for granted now, that was Tor Sørnes.
Wow.
So he, was inspired to do work he was proud of and change a tiny corner of the world, and that was one person's decision. And I love that story. I think it's as you say, it's one that we don't know about. We haven't heard about, and that's also one of the reasons I wrote this book, because people come to me for help with their storytelling or their story strategy, and they say, "Oh, well, it's all very well for a brand like Apple or Airbnb or even a company like Uber before they were in the news lately for
Sure.
for working practices that weren't great." People say, "Oh, it's okay for these startups in Silicon Valley because they have sexy stories." And what I have found is that there is not a company on the planet or a business on the planet that wasn't founded from some type of great intention.
Sure.
It's just that we forget those stories. We forget the reason why we started, or we forget to talk about them. So going back to Assa Abloy, part of my job was to reflect back to them and say, okay, let's dig into your backstory and see, why your company exists, who founded it, and let more people in the company know that. Because as new people come on board and we stop talking about our backstories, then we lose that cultural thread.
Sure. I think it's also about, it feels to me that it's like finding the trigger that provides the impetus. So it's almost like the spark, as it were.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
I think that's kind of great. But then in the book, you're also going to talk about this idea that you talk about, people talk about searching for their story, but then you make this distinction between the right story versus the real story. I mean, and can you explain to me what you mean by that? Because it feels like there's a trap in there that many firms fall into.
Yeah. Well, the right story, the interesting distinction between the right story and the real story is the real story is the authentic story, and that's the right story to be telling, as
Sure.
opposed to in marketing, we tend to think about finding the right story to do X, Y, Z. What's the story that is going to get people to do this?
Right.
What can we say to get them to do that, when actually the right story to tell is the real story, the truth. And I think we forget that along the way. I was just listening to a podcast today about advertising and how, over the years we've tried to manipulate with, cute characters on breakfast cereals and things, and it actually works.
Yeah.
But is that the work that we're proud of doing?
So, and then another question, just for clarification as well, is that, I mean, I understand the story. I mean, we are storytelling beings, and I understand the idea about and the importance of being story kind of driven. But is that the same thing as having being meaningful, or being having a meaning that, or being purpose driven, or is there a difference, or is it all part of interlocking sets, as it were.
Well, you'll see, Adrian, from this model that obviously, let me explain the model to people, and maybe you could put the download, the PDF on in your show notes too,
Done.
so that people could just grab hold of it. I'll send you the link.
Perfect.
It starts, if you can imagine a pyramid, like something like Maslow's hierarchy of needs pyramid.
Yeah.
It starts with your backstory, your journey to now, your values, which are your guiding beliefs. Then on top of that is purpose, and then vision, and then strategy. And the thing about purpose and the whole movement from the great work that Simon Sinek has done with Start With Why is that people are keen to do more meaningful work. They're keen to understand, well, what's the purpose of our business? But what I've noticed is that people find it very hard, and companies find it very hard to just pluck a purpose out of thin air. So the whole story-driven, and the reason that I have tried to ground people in story as a framework is because purpose sometimes tends to be about how we get from here to there. Right. And we really need to think about how we got from there to here. So thinking about Moyes as an example, how did he get to the point where he is the kind of person he is, doing the kind of work that he does in only the way that he can do it? And the same with, a company like Assa Abloy. How, what was their origin story? What was their backstory? And how does that inform their values and their purpose today? Right. So yes, while purpose is important, you just don't dream it up out of thin air. There's a foundation underpinning it.
So, and in many, you're just taking the words out of my mouth, because I'm looking at the diagram now, or the figure in the book, and I'm thinking, so purpose is an idea that, and meaning is a set of ideas that's great, having great growing momentum in the business world right now. But as you rightly say, is that many people have difficulty pinning that down sometimes, because they end up kind of getting caught in the whole "I need to try and save the world" type of thing. And you think, well, actually, no, you don't. Maybe you do, but actually, it depends what the world means. It doesn't need to be the whole world. It could be your local world, or the world of your office, or whatever it might be, the world of your customers. But actually, you can get help with that by actually digging back into, like as you say, the backstory and what we learn from that, and that how that underpins everything, because then that makes it a bit more, I guess, more coherent in many ways.
It does. And, thinking about, I've been on a personal journey and realized that my backstory has informed the work that I do today, which is, helping people to, unlock their potential and to do work that they're proud of. Because I lost my brother 18 years ago, and he was 31 at the time, and didn't get the opportunity to do that work that he was proud of. I mean, he raised a beautiful family and did lots of other things, but he had ambitions to do things that he never got the chance to see out. So I feel like it's, I've got this sense of urgency to get people doing that work today, not to sit on the side and wait. Perfect.
And so, thank you for explaining the framework. I'll make sure I get all that linked up when we do the write up and things. The other thing I really like about the book is that it's full of stories from a variety of sources and all sorts of shapes and sizes. Some big brands that are recognizable, but also lots of other standout smaller firms that I think is really important, because there is a danger, I think, that we end up trotting out the same examples, these exemplar companies like, the Apples, the Airbnbs, the Amazons of this world, which can, there's a danger that then their achievements can sometimes feel unachievable for anybody else, because they're Apple or they're sort of Airbnb and they're Amazon, if you know what I mean. And so I really like the fact that you've put in some of these smaller firms, like particularly like Miss Gertrude Salon and the Heat Holders Thermal Socks, because they're just small sort of they're smaller sort of individual
Mm.
in businesses, but successful in their own right. So, I mean, could you tell me about those two? Because I just think
Yeah,
those stories are really great as well.
I'm glad you picked up on that because I love the idea of reflecting back to people that, changing the world is about changing a world, changing your tiny corner of the world. So, Miss, I have a love affair with hairdressers because I think there's something about them. If you see how and hear the things that people divulge to their hairdresser, it's
Sure.
unbelievable. This special relationship they have with the hairdresser. I've always written about them.
Mm-hmm.
This is my local hairdresser, and it was started. This she's a Scottish girl now living in Melbourne, and she's a real introvert. So
Mm-hmm.
she's called Leanne, and she's got this salon that is kind of a sanctuary. It's not your typical, a lot of hair salons, great up-to-date modern hair salons are very, they're kind of noisy. They've got a lot of extroverts in there. There's a lot of, chatting. And you go into this place and it's a completely different vibe.
Right.
And it's intentional. It's a salon completely staffed by introverts, and they've got this culture of really taking care of people. And nobody, you sit down and you get, a glass of water and a magazine, and somebody will offer you a coffee. And it doesn't. These seem to be unwritten rules, and the owner will sweep up hair as well as the girl who's just employed on Saturday to wash the hair. So she's been able to create this great culture in this salon by, being who she is, by bringing the best of herself to the work that she does and doing something she's proud of.
And I guess that the kind of the story in that is that actually it's being not trying to recreate something, but understanding who you are and where you're coming from, and making sure that you do something which embodies kind of what you're about, and, what you value.
Yeah, the temptation is to do what everybody else is doing.
Sure.
And to try and, imitate. And now more than ever, because we can see what everyone else is doing on social media, or, we compare much more on a global scale, and we're not just local anymore. So I feel like there's an opportunity for us to, again, think about what difference it is we want to create without falling into that comparison trap.
Perfect.
And he told us,
yes,
we're
indeed.
also a great example. These are a UK brand, and there was a race there's been a race to the bottom in this in the industry, in the manufacturing industry, as you probably know, in the UK, where the factories were closing down and everything was going offshore. And the same with these guys. It got to the point where, it was how thin can we make the socks to get them cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And they just got to the point where this was three generations of a family who had worked in this sock industry doing work they were really proud of.
Yeah.
And suddenly they got to the point where they woke up one day in the third generation and said, hang on a second, we're not proud of this anymore. What about, flipping this on its head and going back to the factory, even though they still do manufacture offshore, and saying to the guys, how can we make the best socks in the world, not the cheapest socks in the world? And the factory, people in the factory thinking they're crazy.
Yes.
So, there's those guys. And another one that's not in this book, which I featured in another book, which I think is a great example of that, is Hyatt Denim.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what David and Claire are doing over there. Yeah. When it's exactly the same thing.
Wales.
Yeah, let's not make the kind of the most jeans. Let's make the best jeans that we can, and then also let's save the denim skills that are in cardigan as well. I mean, it's
exactly.
In fact, I've got some Hyatt jeans on today.
I was so tempted to put them in this book, but I think I've probably put them in two books. So I need to share the love. But I'm so pleased to see how well David and Claire are doing. And now that Meghan Markle's wearing their jeans, apparently they've got to move to a new factory, and they've got a 3-month wait list for their jeans,
really?
which is fabulous. Yeah, it's true. So it's fabulous.
Oh wow!
Yeah, they're amazing.
They're great. So yeah, I mean, I hope then that it doesn't kind of they're wildly popular kind of now. I mean, I hope that that doesn't kind of change things kind of too much, and they can actually still keep up with the base that they've already kind of got. But I mean,
I don't think that's the other thing about being story driven, isn't it? Because if you think about it, the top of this pyramid is your strategy. So, align opportunities, plans, and behavior.
Sure.
Well, what happens is people who come to me, they just say, sometimes give me the strategy. We sometimes think about jumping into the plan. What's the plan for telling our story without having all this underpinning? When you're a brand like Hyatt Denim, run by people like David and Claire, with the backstory that they have, with their values, their purpose, and their vision, I don't think there's a way you can go wrong. You're always going to be your strategy is always going to be informed by those things. Similar to a brand like Patagonia that's been hugely successful, but they still operate with that same integrity.
No, absolutely. So, Bernadette, if people are listening to this, leaders and entrepreneurs, and they're thinking, yeah, okay, that's striking a chord with them, and they want to, get started on their own journey. I mean, where would you recommend that they start? Is it about digging around, finding out and figuring out what your own backstory is?
Backstory is key. We tend to sort of brush it under the carpet, and it was the main reason for writing this book, because I've seen it time and again, people forgetting to dig into that reason that they started. So I start there. What's the reason you started? What was, that spark, as you said, Adrian, that ignited this idea for your business? Because I have yet to find a business that was not founded in some great intention to change something.
Sure.
So stories are a catalyst for change. They always have been. And business comes a really close second.
Yeah.
When you dig back into the local businesses that we grew up with, they were always about community and doing something in the community, a contribution. I think that's true of any business.
No, absolutely. It's and I think there's I think often, sometimes it's not just about the backstory of the business, but also the backstory of the people that go into the business, because actually those things can inform and also influence the lead up to that spark moment as well. I would suggest.
Absolutely. This is. I hope this is something I've dug into in the book a little bit more. But yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right.
So, Bernadette, I mean, I don't want to go into the book sort of anymore, because hopefully we're giving some people a flavour of what's in the book, and then that will entice people to go on and investigate the book in themselves. But is there anything else that you'd like to point out or add before I ask you my final question?
About the book, you mean?
Yeah, or anything really.
What I'd like to point out to people is that, to spend more time reflecting on who they are, what it is they want to change, and less time comparing and wondering how other people are getting on in the world, or how that business over there is managing to do it. Because I think we are in danger of doing that a little bit too often. So that would be my best advice for today.
Perfect. And so that brings me to my final question, Bernadette. And again, I've asked you this probably a number of times before, but the question remains the same. I think we're now in excess of 260 interviews, which it feels like a lot. But the question is this: is there anything you'd like to shamelessly plug today?
Firstly, I want to say congratulations, 260 interviews. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Congratulations to you. It's a big effort, right? This is not something that's bringing business to your door necessarily. It's a real contribution.
Yeah, it's for me, the thing we were talking before. The thing I like about this is that I don't do it to market myself. I do it to learn from other people, and then to help them share their stories, as it were. So it becomes like a story research effort. So I get to do some research, and do some learning, but then it just on a platform that is kind of almost unconditional. It's just going like, here's what I found out. Hopefully you're going to find that useful. And that's kind of why I do it. And if people find it interesting, then that's brilliant. That's a real bonus for me. And it seems that people do. And so there is a story behind the story finding effort.
Yeah, I maybe we should have been digging into your backstory and what got you from here, from there to here.
But I'll tell you what,
we do that another time.
Well, yeah, maybe we should. But I'll tell you what I'm going to do, Bernadette. I'm going to shamelessly plug Story Driven because, I really I'm a collector of stories. My own story, but also stories of firms that I've spoken to and things that people can do. And because I believe that we are story beings, and it's stories that move us, and it's stories that we connect with. And I really like the idea of the stories that you've put in the book and how it becomes applicable to everybody, but also really personal. And if you get that to that personal level, then you end up getting, it's very easy to translate it and to motivate ourselves because it's all very aligned. It's not fake. It's kind of very real. It's very personal. And it's very transferable and translatable as well. So people who are listening or who are reading, please go and check out Bernadette's book, Story Driven. Grab yourself a copy. You won't be disappointed. I really liked it.
Thank you. I would never do that. I wasn't going to plug the book.
Yeah, well, I thought you were being slightly hesitant, so I thought I'd just plug it for you. But anyway.
I'll tell you what I was going to plug. I was going to plug my friend Seth Godin's marketing seminar. If anybody's looking for a great community of people to join and in their marketing efforts, go to Seth's marketing seminar.
Perfect.
themarketingseminar.com.
We will kind of plug that too. But Bernadette, I just want to say it's always a pleasure talking to you. I'm tipping my hat to the work that you do and say may it long continue. And just want to say thank you very much for sharing some time with us today to tell us about your latest book. And congratulations on that. And just, thanks so much. It's been great.
Thanks for the work you're doing. Thanks.
Well, that's it for another interview. I really hope you enjoyed it. Now, every time I complete one of these interviews, I learn something new. And I try and incorporate that new learning into my writing, my speaking, my workshops, and the consulting that I do for my clients. If you're interested, you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do listen in again. All the very best.